Finally here, Howard.
Finally here, yes. Only taken 10 years. So after something of a prolonged wait, bearing in mind we were talking about this at least a decade ago, maybe even longer than that, a decade and a half, I don't know, we have come right up to the very north of the island towards the Point of Ayre. People know up there, of course, where the lighthouse is, to meet up and take a look. Well, we'll hear more in a moment from our guests we have with us paddling or showing us around here today, just starting with Neil Morris. And, well, we were just saying, it's been quite a time before we actually got up here. This has been a long-term project?
It's been a long-awaited treat for us all, yes. It's taken a while to get all the legalities sorted, but we're well underway now. And David, who's the site manager up here, has started quite a number of projects in terms of making the site better for wildlife and also preparing it for visiting.
So just give us a sort of brief potted history then, or give us a bit more of where we are, because I've been saying we're right up, people know the Point of Ayre, they know where the lighthouse are. We're basically sort of just off there at an old tipping site, an old aggregate site?
An old aggregates quarry. So we're just inside the headland. We can see the lighthouse of the Point of Ayre behind us, and you're in an area where island aggregates have taken a lot of the gravel and sand out of the ground. We're also surrounded by the old community landfills as well, two of which have been capped and nature is returning there. But we're just about to walk into the Point of Ayre National Reserve, which is essentially centred around a huge lagoon which has been quarried out and has now filled with water table and rainfall.
Terrific. Right, well, we'll march on a bit further forward then and see what we can see.
Well, David has to take photos.
This is going to be like a seated platform, is it? Or?
Yes, it'll be like a reception area, so we'll have some paths through here. We'll have a few feature sculptures, we'll have more information to orient you as you enter the reserve. And then there'll also be an observation platform on the corner here where you can look down at what we call Dragon Alley. It's an area that's been created for dragonflies. We'll have a look at that in a minute. And then you've got the path to our right here which leads on down into the nature reserve.
That's terrific, and we can see it sort of scoped out here with some sticks and posts just to give an idea of where the work's actually going to go. Just thinking of the site itself then, like I said, it has been a long time coming, and it's been an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes over that time. So is it now, assuming we're happy to talk about it now, so it is a sort of like a long-term lease now? How does it work?
It is. It's a long-term lease with the landowners Island Aggregates. And the idea is that as more quarrying works finish, that land too will be added into the nature reserve. So it'll grow incrementally over time. And there's probably a 30 to 50 year time scale before the whole site is finished as a commercial entity and it can all be turned over for nature. We're working on the first 105 acres now, and the job is to make it as good as we can, get people in to enjoy wildlife and really set a standard that the other areas can then aspire to as they come into the leaseholding.
And it's one of those fascinating things, isn't it? I suppose it's not completely unheard of, but this idea you've got sort of heavy industry, as it were, in the aggregates right next door to a site here which is going to be purely for conservation and nature.
Yes, we accept that decisions were taken many years ago that this is the area where the island could most cost effectively acquire its aggregates for the construction industry. The island doesn't import aggregates and it doesn't export these aggregates. These are all used locally. So that decision has been taken. And then the second best decision we can take is to restore it for nature once that industrial work has finished.
And I suppose from that point of view, as you say, it's the fact that it can be restored, because it's those of a certain age coming up here when everything was still active, and the sites, you had right spits north and east and the tipping sites. Yes, it was, or it could be a bit pretty industrial looking, whereas now we're going to claim some of it back for nature, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. We'll never have enough material to put back into the areas of excavation, so those will always remain as low-lying areas, many of them filling up with water. But the idea is to get the rest of the area, the capped landfill sites. We've got Right Spit North behind us, which is the last active landfill. to blend those seamlessly back into the rest of the Ayre's NNR, so that you have this one contiguous ecological unit all the way effectively from Ramsey north through to Derby in the west.
I'm David Andrews, I'm the Reserve Manager for Manx Birdlife. I've been here about just towards 3 years now. I was working previously for the RSPB up in Scotland, and saw the job advertised here and came across for the role to take it on as a new project.
So it is something you need a sort of, I suppose you do need a vision to actually see how this place is going to be. You can see as we're walking around now, various bits of, we've got marker posts, we've got fence posts coming in. It's an idea of sort of sculpting out the framework, as it were, the skeleton of what's going on first and then filling it in.
Yeah, to a certain extent. We have a long-term plan with something I've put in place. It's the first focus is always going to be the wildlife, but to get people in as well, we need to be able to screen the wildlife so that that's not disturbed, but also keep the people safe and on track. So it's very much a plan of infrastructure that's going to help facilitate people to see the wildlife while keeping the wildlife safe.
And so do you sort of spend full-time working here?
Yeah, so it's a full-time role. I'm based here, and unfortunately it's not
in all
always
weathers.
Here. Well, unfortunately there's quite a bit of office work involved as well, unfortunately. It would be nice to be out here every day, but that's not possible.
And how does it compare, this sort of project, with the work you've done in the past in the UK?
Yeah, so similar. So I've always worked on reserves, so quite a lot of experience of that. There's this kind of thing, restoring old agriculture, gravel pits back to wildlife is becoming quite commonplace in the UK. So it's new for here, but it's quite a common experience in the UK.
And is it difficult balancing act on the one hand, because I can see on one partly we're reclaiming the land, you're having to do the landscaping, but equally at the same time presumably you've got to try and encourage the wildlife or make sure we're not doing anything to actually upset the wildlife who are already using the area.
Yeah, there's a balance. It's important we do get people in to see the wildlife, because if people can't see that and can't understand what's going on, it's difficult for them to care about it. But the wildlife does come first. It is a nature reserve for the wildlife. So, but that's easily enough done. You can put structures in place. A lot of the work we've done so far is all about that, putting those structures in place that the wildlife can live as it wants to, but people can still see it.
And work-wise, obviously you're here working full-time. I'm taking it you won't be doing it all single-handed.
No, we have lots of volunteers as well. So we have a group that comes in once a month at the weekend, and then other individuals that come and help. And it's obviously not all just me. We have contractors in place as well who come and do work for us. It's good to involve. There's a good group of volunteers here who will get stuck in as well.
And we were talking with Neil as we were wandering down here and saying long term, we're talking sort of 30, 40, 50 years. In a sort of shorter time scale, what sort of time scale are you working towards to sort of get the, as we were saying, coming in and looking at the weather platform, the welcoming platform coming in, maybe information boards and such out there? What sort of time scale are you looking at to sort of, or do you have various phases you'll be working towards?
It's always going to be phases. We're hoping to get general public access sometime in the spring next year. And then the site will continue to develop. It won't be finished as such by that point. By that point, we allow access in some form or other. Hopefully that front area that we just mentioned there will be done. But it will be a long-term project. It will continue to develop over the next 20, 30 years. And
will this be managed or overseen by Manx Birdlife?
Yeah, so it's a Manx Birdlife project, and we will continue to oversee that in partnership with Island Aggregates, and we also get advice from the RSPB as well.
Right, we've come a bit further down then, Neil. We can see one of the ponds. So give us an outline. We're just chatting to David there. Give us an outline of actually what is going to be created here, because we're talking about various sort of dubs or ponds and the landscaping. What sort of areas are we trying to create here?
Lots of different areas, a whole mosaic of different dry, wet, low and high habitats. It's very efficient to quarry somewhere in straight lines with flat bottoms. Nature doesn't like that. Nature likes lots of complexity. So what we're doing retrospectively is creating a lot more complexity into the system. So where there are straight lines, we're bending them. Where there are straight, steep, sides to these embankments here, we're making them more complex. So the more different wet, dry, high, low, sunny, sheltered, cold, warm areas you can provide, the more niches you're providing for different biodiversity to pack into the site.
And when it comes to doing this sort of restoration work here, I suppose the interesting thing is obviously we are where we are, and that we are working on an old industrial site which has been quarried and the aggregates have been taken here for a number of years. Are we trying to sort of put it back as to how it might have been before there'd been quarrying, or are we sort of creating a new habitat?
It's a new habitat. It's a secondary habitat in the main. So we don't have enough materials to fill the areas that have been excavated. So those deep excavated areas will remain. They're filling up with water, and it's providing this secondary freshwater wetland habitat. It is of course surrounded by these higher areas, and what we're trying to do is seamlessly bring in and blend the heathland from around us. You've got the Ayres NNR to the west, you've got the Lighthouse heathland to the east, and we're trying to seamlessly blend that in as a primary habitat into the secondary habitat that has then been created and left behind after the industrial activity.
And then species-wise, I mean, do you think we have different species using this area now, whether they're migratory or actually staying here, feeding here, than we would have had it not been used for industry?
Absolutely. So if it had been left as heathland, so if you're familiar with the Ayres NNR, that wonderful open flat stretch of heathland, then you would have had a set of biodiversity, a single set across the Ayres. But with this new scrubland and the freshwater habitats that are being created, probably we're adding in another 50 species to the environment here across the year, and certainly in terms of breeding species we could add another 20 species in as well. So by creating, albeit a secondary habitat, but by creating a new habitat, you're bringing in new biodiversity.
Which is fascinating, isn't it? Because opposed to the layman's ears, you think, well, it seems almost a paradox, doesn't it, off the back of heavy industry and something which you normally, conservationists and nature lovers would think, oh, that's the last thing we want to see. We could, long term, actually see more biodiversity.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we certainly wouldn't be advocating for ripping up the NNR heathland, but this area has been designated for excavation. That is what has happened. And so the secondary habitat that is now developing, it is not the original habitat. We'll never go back to the original habitat, but it is a highly valuable habitat. And it has a particular ecology in terms of the nature of the water that's here, the nature of the shingle and sand underneath our feet, which creates a unique habitat in the context of the Isle of Man. I know unique is very often overused and abused, but truly here the assemblage of organisms from birds to butterflies to the plant life is truly unique as an assemblage within the Isle of Man context, because the ecology of the system here itself is unique within the Isle of Man.
And I know we've said this before, but it's like an incredibly complex balancing act all the time, isn't it? And the fact that we've got, mankind obviously lives on the Isle of Man. We have to go about building and industry and the rest of it, and we have various areas designated, as we know, for various plans. At the same time as we have a biosphere here, we're trying to sort of encourage more biodiversity, encourage the wildlife to survive. It always strikes me that it's not so much a sort of a battle as a sort of a really complex balancing act long term.
Yes, primary habitat is always the best habitat, so you really want to hang on to what you've got, and there's a balance to be made about how much of that habitat do we take for our own uses versus how much do we leave. But primary habitat are naturally regenerated, naturally rewilded habitat, and we have here a secondary system, and all we're doing is making topological changes to the shape of the ground, and we're letting nature then take over and regenerate it naturally. So although it's a secondary environment, we're allowing nature to naturally regenerate the system here, and that will give us a stronger, more robust and resilient system going forward than if we were to try to cosmetically plant trees and other things that just don't really belong here.
I'm Alison Leonard. I'm the Managing Director of Manx Birdlife.
And this is something, I know you've been up here before, something very exciting project, I suppose, from Birdlife's point of view.
It's incredibly exciting. It gives us a real opportunity to, do something for nature on the Isle of Man. There's huge potential here for both the nature, but also for the people, which we also have to consider. So yeah, it's incredibly exciting.
Have you worked on similar projects like this before?
Yeah, so my background, similar to David, I've come from working on reserves in Scotland. So yeah, I've done things like this before. I worked on a gravel pits in Cambridgeshire years and years and years ago. So as David said, it's not a new technique. It's not something that's new in the UK, but it's new here on the Isle of Man. So we're very excited that we're the ones that are actually going to get to do it.
So I suppose coming and working in those sort of areas and up in Scotland, you'll recognise a lot of the, I suppose I always think the Isle of Man's a bit like Scotland in miniature.
It is, yeah. It's very similar species, but different enough that it's special in its own way.
And then from Birdlife's point of view, because of course rebranded a while back, Manx Bird Atlas originally, this all obviously forms part of the work done by Manx Birdlife generally. Does the actual database work for Manx Birdlife, where it first started out, coming out with the book after 5 years, that sort of all goes on in the background?
Yeah, we're still very much collecting all of that data. So we've got all of the data from Manx Bird Atlas. I think it was over 600,000 records in that first 5 years. We're still building on that, so every year we get probably another 120,000 records from people from various sightings across the island that they can submit to us, but also through our garden birdwatch scheme, where people send us weekly records of what they see in their garden, which is just as important as some of the work we're doing here, because we've got to remember it's not all about the big glamorous birds, but we want to know what's happening with the little songbirds in our gardens as well.
And some of those have been under threat in recent years.
Yeah, so our garden birdwatch has been running for 20 years now, and we're actually just in the process of analysing all of that data, and it's a huge amount of data. But some of the trends that it's showing us are quite frankly terrifying. Some of the species that we've lost, things like yellowhammer, we've pretty much lost them as a bird on the Isle of Man. Other species, have massively declined. Greenfinch have shown massive declines over that 20 years. And if it wasn't for people, submitting those records, weekly, we wouldn't know things like that.
And do we have any steer at the moment on to why they have had declined or disappeared? Are we talking habitat loss? Are we talking pollution? Are we talking other sort of global warming influences? Do we have any idea?
It's probably a mixture of all of those things. So yeah, the habitat loss is a massive issue for a lot of species. Climate change, our climate is changing. We're getting more and more storms in the summer. It's warmer. That has an impact on for the insect eaters when they're available. Disturbance is a big issue as well. We're all getting out more, walking the dogs, going to these places, which is great. We want people to engage with nature and enjoy it, but in a responsible way. So yeah, there's probably not one thing that's impacting them all. It's unfortunately just lots of little things. And then you've got things like avian flu, which has had a massive impact on our seabirds and our wildfowl over the last couple of years. It's all just happening at the same time.
And then will there be, I know again, as you say, the data is being added to all the time. Is the idea, because clearly once you've got a sort of a base set of data, that's where you can then start and sort of change over. So from the bird atlas point of view, or from working within Manx Birdlife, will there be another, is it every 5 years they'll do another sort of full survey of the island, or how does that work?
I don't think that there's not a plan to do a full survey of the island. That was a huge amount of work to undertake. Yeah. And so Chris Sharp, who set that up, did an amazing job kicking all of this off. But I don't think any of us have the time or the energy to do that again. What we are doing, so we do censuses each year. So last year we did the breeding hen harrier census. Mm-hmm. Hopefully next year we're going to look at chough. So we are still looking at some of those sort of iconic species. We would like to do some of the other species, things like curlew, which have been shown massive declines over the last few years. We'd really like to try and do some work on them. But yeah, no plans for anything massive. But yeah, we're still keeping our eye on things and making sure, we know what's going on.
So it's a case of sort of collating all these other streams of data we were talking about, the sort of garden birdwatch schemes and the farmland birdwatch schemes. I think it's bringing all this data together to sort of form a bigger picture.
Exactly, yeah. There's data coming in from lots of places, and yeah, we'll just look at it as a whole and see how things are doing.
Okay, we've just come a little bit further up the track, and some been work going on here. So it's stood by a barrier here, which looks like it's fairly recently erected, with a nice, good, solid wood top on, looking out over a semi-flooded area in front of us. So what's this space here then, David?
So this is the old lagoon left over from when the quarry company excavated all the aggregate and the gravel. It's a big body of water, sort of straight sides, steep edges, and we've done a lot of work in there to increase the complexity in there and to create more edge. We've put some new islands in. We've shallowed off the edge. What we wanted to create is a lot of different niches, a lot of different areas where different species can get in to increase that biodiversity. So we want shallow water as well as deep water. We want a lot of edges. We want sheltered bits. We want bits that are open to the wind. And we've done that by taking some aggregate, by creating new ponds, digging out new areas and using that to build these islands and to shallow off the edges and create bays and little bits where all different types of things can get in there, all different habitats within the landscape.
So it's a bit like building your garden pond, but on a giant scale.
Yeah, very much. And one of the things we have here is the water levels change quite a bit. So by having those long, shallow edges, whatever height the water level is at, we've got shallow water, we've got deep water. We've also put in, you'll see on the left-hand side there, a big bank, which helps screen visitors when they're coming, so we don't get any disturbance on that area. Obviously, this is all very new at the moment. It's going to take a few years to vegetate up. But once that does, we're going to have hope this area will really bring in a lot more wildlife.
And the water here, this is all just natural, so this is just left for natural rainfall?
Yeah, it's groundwater mainly, so there's no streams to come in, there's no rivers. It's rainfall or the groundwater that flows off the hills and flows out this way. So we have no control over the water levels, and it does vary quite a bit.
But no, I've been up here when it's been really incredibly flooded.
Yeah, it does. And so, I mean, it's noticeable this winter, it's been the water's quite level at quite low at the moment. A couple of winters ago, it was really wet. So it is varying a lot in the 3 years I've been here. It's really varied.
And actually, just looking out when you're talking about the landscaping, the design, when you're actually designing something on this scale, is this sort of done by committee, or is it all handed over to you as the project manager, or how does that work?
So we've had advice. We've had the OSPB ecologists have been over and had a look, and we've had advice from them. But between them and ourselves as Manx Birdlife, we've come up with this design. And there's a basic design there, but it doesn't have to be perfect. What we want is rough edges. It's not like a landscaped perfect garden. We want rough edges. So we have the basic structure there, and then the rest can be nature can bash it around a bit and make those little niches.
And then sort of longer term, as you say, once this vegetates up, and obviously it will change. You can see it's been worked quite recently, but I'm sure, like a lot of things, it'll be amazing how quickly this will completely change and be taken over by the vegetation coming back. What sort of species in these sort of habitats are we hoping to attract and encourage?
A lot of this is about providing cover. So around the edges, we'll hopefully get a lot more emergent vegetation coming up. We've got a kestrel going past there.
Oh yeah.
So that will then provide cover for things like invertebrates. We'll get the younger fish going in, which then provides food or for the largest for the birds, from the ducks. It also provides cover for the ducks to get in the nest. And the islands are good for the ground nesting birds. A lot of the birds in this area are aggressive underground and really struggle with predation. So by putting islands in, or we have a couple of, you'll see on the corner there, a couple of rafts, effectively artificial islands. It just provides that little bit of extra protection for the ground nesting birds to help them get their young away.
Well, you can see already how it's beginning to take shape, and like I said, people will be coming up in the next few years. We'll see this change quite radically. So I've been on a merlin hunt for the last couple of years. Is this a good place to come merlin-wise, or should it be further down towards the Ayres or the Ayres Visitor Centre?
No, we will get merlin coming through this time of year, particularly as well. In fact, I've had a couple this morning, so you just missed them.
There. That's wildlife for you. Typical. Well, I'll keep my eyes open. We're here for another couple of minutes. You never know. So here we are, a little bit further up then, and looking again at some of the islands you're saying that have been made here. The floating rafts over there, some of the islands that were sculpted earlier on. And we were just hearing a story with these plankings going in, but this caused a slight problem with the oyster catchers, or at least a problem from a work point of view.
Yeah, so we're just building a viewing screen here, so it'll be wooden planks with holes in, so we can view through to the wildlife out there without disturbing it. We actually started building it in the spring, and we've obviously picked the right place because just after starting it, we had oyster catchers coming in nest right in front of it, which meant we had to then stop the work because every time we came in, they were off the nest, running away. So we've stopped that, and they actually raised 2 chicks out of that nest, which was good. But now we can get back on and get that finished.
And is that a problem you often encounter when you're working in areas like this, where obviously you have a lot of nature, that when you're actually doing the work, there is that problem that, gosh, we could be upsetting some of the nature which is already here? Yeah,
so we are restricted in the times we can do a lot of the work. The nesting period, a lot of the work has to stop. And then we have the winter as well, which makes it quite difficult to work in. So we are actually quite limited for a lot of the bigger works in the time periods we can do that.
And so this time of the year, obviously, as we're talking now, we're just into October. Is it a quieter time of the year from the point of view of the rest of the landscaping, or what will you be aiming to do between sort of now and next spring?
This is actually a time where we can get a lot of the work done because the nesting period is over and we're not into the really bad weather yet. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's an area at the front, the entrance area, which we've looked at. We've got more screens like this to go in. We've got quite a bit of fencing. A lot of it is getting that structure in place so that we're ready to open next spring.
And that's you working with volunteers, or?
Yeah, so we're working with volunteers. Some of the work we'll get contractors in to do, but we have a good group of volunteers and we'll rely on them quite a bit.
Well, this is a bit handy as we go right up towards the top end, and there's a wonderful hiding place already. I'll just go in and take a look here. Oh yes. This is very nice. So you've got a lovely viewing windows all the way down one side and at both ends, which will open out on nice days and close up with the winds lashing in and the rain's coming in. And you've got a great view out over the lagoon in front here, which we've been walking alongside adjacent to it, coming down this far side. Very nice too. What have we got out here today then, Alison?
So we've got a few ducks. We've got some tufted duck, some coots. There's quite a large flock of feral greylag geese as well that spend quite a lot of time here on the reserve. And actually on the far bank you can see we've actually got a couple of chough feeding on the grass over there as well, which is nice.
Oh yes, just on the far side there. Oh, wonderful. Right, I'll get my own binoculars out and take a look. So in the hide at the top end there, and you can see this is going to be a great resource. People coming here, space for a lot of people to come actually and sit in relative comfort and the dry and watch the birds in the fullness of time. And fair amount of work for you, David, to actually get this one up. It's a good size hide.
Yeah, the majority of this work was done by contractors, and then we're finishing it off ourselves just to get it in up to how we want it to be. You see, it's still a work in progress, but we're getting there.
It is terrific. And then people obviously wants the... So again, are we thinking about next year to have this open, or later than that?
Yeah, this will be open when the whole site opens. And this will be the main viewing area for people who are visiting.
And people coming and sitting here then, so just looking out, what sort of species would you see normally at this time of year? I know we've noticed a few. Christy and Neil have been spotting a few as we've been talking. What would you normally see this time of year? Yeah,
so this time of year, a lot of the winter ducks are just starting to arrive. So we can see we've got a few potchard over there. We've got gadwall, tufted ducks. We've just seen our first goldeneye of the winter arrive this morning.
Well, I missed it, of course, but everyone else did.
Yeah, so that's the winter species starting to arrive. We've had quite a few pink-footed geese starting to come through. And what you see here will vary a lot depending on the season. But at the moment, we're starting to see those winter ducks arrive.
Well, there we go, just closing up. So it's taken a few years then, Neil, but we have eventually got here. Well worth a visit. Thanks very much indeed for showing us around today. Great pleasure, and it's just an amazing site. You must be very excited to see it actually taking shape.
Oh, it's very exciting. I mean, it's a long-term project, so we'll do our bit, we'll set the standard, and then it'll be for future generations to finish it off. But what an amazing legacy for the island, and we do have to say thank you to the wonderful volunteers who've helped us. Island Aggregates, RSPB, they've all had an input which has helped us do it faster and do it better, so we're very grateful. It's been a real community effort. Great support from government at the start of this project. A lot of organisations on the island have helped as well, and if we can keep everybody engaged, all hands to the mill as they say, then we can keep going and keep developing this amazing place.